The call that reopened the case didn't come from a detective. It came from a demolition foreman with dust in his lungs and something heavy in his voice. He had been clearing the final structure on the edge of Hollow Creek Township, a fading rural pocket just east of the Ohio-Kentucky line. The house had stood empty for years, windows boarded, roof sagging, grass tall enough to hide deer. It was scheduled to come down quietly, the last reminder of a family that had long since scattered. But halfway through the teardown, one of the crew members stopped the machinery. Under a section of collapsed flooring, wedged between rotted beams and compacted dirt, they found something that didn't belong to a house. A small plastic doll. And beside it, tangled in debris and hardened mud, a child's yellow gown dress. By the time law enforcement arrived, word had already begun to spread through Hollow Creek. Not because of what the items were, but because of who they belonged to. Before heading forward into today's heartbreaking story, make sure you support the channel, like this video, leave a comment, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next true crime story just like this. 20 years earlier, two siblings had vanished without a trace. And for the first time since 1998, the town was forced to say their names again. Back then, the children were barely old enough to understand rules, let alone danger. Evan Cole, age 5, had last been seen wearing a blue short-sleeve shirt and khaki shorts. His sister, Lila Cole, just 3.5, clutched a doll everywhere she went. On the morning they disappeared, she wore a yellow gown dress, light fabric, frayed hem, already stained from play. Their home sat at the end of Ridgeway Spur Road, a narrow stretch that curved into farmland and disappeared into woods. Their parents, Daniel and Ruth Cole, had lived there quietly for years. No criminal history. No known enemies. No signs of instability that would later make sense of what happened. The disappearance was reported shortly after noon. Daniel told police he had stepped out to check a generator near the shed. Ruth said she was inside folding laundry. When they realized the children weren't nearby, they assumed they'd wandered toward the fence line, as they sometimes did. But minutes stretched into panic. Within an hour, neighbors joined the search. By nightfall, deputies, volunteers, dogs, and thermal units flooded the area. Fields were combed. Wells were checked. Creek beds were dragged. Every abandoned structure within miles was searched. Nothing. No footprints leading away from the house. No disturbed soil. No torn fabric. No sightings beyond the property line. By the third day, search teams quietly began shifting their language. Not when the children would be found, but if. Hollow Creek became a town frozen in unfinished sentences. 4 months, yellow ribbons stayed tied to mailboxes. The Coles appeared on local news, their faces hollow, repeating details they'd already given dozens of times. Evan's blue shirt. Lila's yellow dress. The doll. Always the doll. Investigators explored every angle. A wandering accident. A wild animal encounter. An opportunistic abduction. None fit. There were no tire tracks. No witnesses. No known predators in the area at the time. And statistically, 2 children disappearing simultaneously, without evidence, was almost unheard of. Eventually, the search teams packed up. The case went cold in stages, not all at once. First the volunteers stopped coming. Then the patrol checks slowed. Then the news stations moved on. The Coles stayed. For a while. Years passed. Ridgeway Spur Road aged poorly. Houses emptied. The school merged with another district. The farmhouse where Evan and Lila had lived became a symbol no one wanted to look at for too long. Ruth Cole left first. Daniel stayed behind, refusing to sell, convinced that leaving would mean abandoning the children a second time. When he finally moved away, nearly a decade later, the house remained untouched, locked, decaying, waiting. By the time the county approved its demolition in 2018, few people even remembered why it mattered. Except one retired investigator who still kept the case file in his basement. And the foreman who made the call. The items recovered during demolition were not found neatly placed. They were forced down into a narrow space where the foundation dipped unnaturally, an area never documented in the original blueprints. The soil around them was compacted by hand, not erosion. The doll's plastic face was cracked. One arm was missing. The yellow dress was barely recognizable. The fabric was stiff with dirt. The seams were torn. The color dulled from bright yellow to something sickly and gray. Yet despite 20 years underground, the pattern matched. So did the size. When the evidence was logged and photographed, one officer reportedly went silent. Because inside the collar of the dress, written faintly in permanent marker, were 3 letters. LC. The same initials Ruth Cole had once described to police, something she'd done herself, afraid the children might lose their clothes during laundry or play. For the first time in 2 decades, the disappearance of Evan and Lila Cole was no longer theoretical. Someone, had brought their belongings back to the surface. News of the discovery reached the Cole family within hours. Ruth, now living several towns away, reportedly collapsed when she heard about the dress. Daniel refused to speak to anyone at first, then demanded to know why the house had been torn down at all. Investigators returned to the original case file and immediately noticed something unsettling. In 1998, search teams had never excavated beneath the house. The area where the items were found had been dismissed as inaccessible due to structural risk. Dogs had never been brought inside. Ground-penetrating radar was never used. For 20 years, whatever had been hidden there remained undisturbed. And whoever put it there had known that. As forensic analysis began, detectives uncovered another detail that shifted the narrative even further. Archived call logs showed that 2 weeks before the disappearance, an anonymous tip had been phoned into the county sheriff's office. The caller claimed they'd seen the Cole children playing near the foundation late at night. The tip had been logged, but never followed up. The responding deputy's name appeared only once in the system. After that, it vanished from departmental records. No transfer. No retirement. No explanation. And when investigators tried to trace him, they hit a wall. Because officially, he had never existed. And as the evidence team prepared to dig deeper beneath the demolished home, a new message arrived at the sheriff's office from an unlisted number. It contained only 6 words. You should have left it buried. The message was traced within minutes. It went nowhere. The number was prepaid, purchased in cash, activated less than an hour before it was sent, and discarded immediately afterward. The phrasing, "you should have left it buried," wasn't dramatic. It wasn't taunting. It sounded annoyed. As if the discovery beneath the old Cole house had interrupted something that had been carefully managed for years. For investigators, that tone mattered. It suggested familiarity, control, and most unsettling of all, it suggested that whoever was responsible hadn't disappeared with time. They had simply waited. The excavation beneath the demolished home began at dawn 3 days later. What the demolition crew had uncovered was only the edge of it. Beneath the foundation, investigators found a narrow cavity reinforced with scavenged wood panels, not part of the original structure. It wasn't a crawl space meant for maintenance. It was something else. Something created deliberately, with enough room for a small person, or 2, to hide. Inside the cavity were additional items. A child's sneaker. Blue. size matching a 5-year-old boy. Fragments of paper, fused together by moisture and time. And a small metal hinge, rusted shut, that suggested a container had once been hidden there, but removed long ago. There were no remains. That absence fractured the case wide open. Because it meant the space hadn't been a grave. It had been a holding place. The media descended on Hollow Creek within days. Headlines recycled the same phrases. New clues, cold case reopened, siblings vanished, evidence found after 20 years. But investigators stayed quiet. They were focused on something far more disturbing than what had been recovered. The cavity showed signs of repeated use. Scrape marks along the wood. Pressed fingerprints in dried mud. Fibers embedded into the panels, some matching the yellow dress, others consistent with cotton clothing. Someone had been down there more than once. And someone else had known about it. Attention turned back to the people closest to the children. Daniel and Ruth Cole were interviewed separately. Again. This time, the questions were different. Had the children ever hidden beneath the house before? Did they play games involving secret spaces? Had anyone else had access to the property? Ruth hesitated on that last one. Then she said a name she hadn't spoken to police in over 20 years. Caleb Moore. Daniel's older cousin. He had lived nearby in the late 1990s, occasionally helping around the property. Repairs, fence posts, generator checks. He was familiar with the house. Familiar enough to know where the foundation dipped. Back in 1998, Caleb had been questioned briefly and dismissed. No record. No follow-up. He'd left Hollow Creek less than a year after the disappearance. Now investigators tried to find him. And discovered he had died. Officially. Caleb Moore's death certificate listed a single vehicle accident in 2009. No autopsy. No surviving family listed. The address on file no longer existed. But when detectives requested the original police report, it was missing. So was the responding officer's name. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, forensic analysts worked through the paper fragments recovered beneath the house. It took weeks. But eventually, using digital reconstruction, they identified faint crayon markings, uneven, looping, childlike. One word appeared repeatedly. Quiet. Another, written shakily, appeared near the edge of one fragment. Ev. The implication landed hard. If Evan had been alive while those markings were made, then the disappearance hadn't been sudden. It hadn't been immediate. It had unfolded over time. And someone had made sure the children stayed silent. As the investigation deepened, so did the pressure. Detectives received another message. This one arrived via email, sent to an account belonging to a junior evidence technician, someone whose name had never appeared in the media. The subject line read, "Wrong direction." The body contained a single image. It was a photograph of Ridgeway Spur Road. Taken recently. From the exact angle where Evan and Lila had last been seen playing. Someone was watching the investigation in real time. Security was increased. Records were reviewed again, this time with a different question in mind, not who took the children, but who protected the person who did. That's when investigators noticed a financial detail buried in old county files. In the 6 months before the disappearance, Daniel Cole had received several cash deposits, small enough not to trigger alarms, frequent enough to raise suspicion now. When questioned, Daniel claimed they came from selling farm equipment privately. There were no receipts. And the amounts stopped abruptly after the children vanished. Daniel denied any wrongdoing. He denied knowing about the cavity beneath the house. He denied ever seeing the doll or dress after 1998. But his voice cracked when detectives asked one final question. Did anyone ever tell you the children were safe? He didn't answer. Then came the witness. Her name was Marjorie Pike, a former school bus driver who had lived 2 properties down from the Coles. In 1998, she had given a statement, brief, dismissed, forgotten. This time, she remembered more. She described seeing a figure near the Cole house late at night, days before the disappearance. Someone standing by the foundation, crouched low. She had assumed it was Daniel working on repairs. But when investigators showed her an old photo lineup, including Caleb Moore, she stopped immediately. "That's him," she said. Then she added something she'd never told anyone before. "I saw the kids," she said quietly. "Not running. Not playing. They were being guided. Like they were told where to step. Guided. Not carried. Not forced. Which meant they trusted whoever was with them." That same night, Ruth Cole received a voicemail. No caller ID. No words. Just breathing. Slow. Intentional. Then a child's voice. Not clear enough to identify. Not young enough to confirm. But close enough to reopen every wound Ruth had spent 20 years trying to close. The call ended abruptly. Within hours, investigators traced the signal to a relay tower less than 10 miles from Hollow Creek. Someone was still close. And whatever had happened to Evan and Lila Cole, it wasn't finished. The tower location gave investigators something they hadn't had in 20 years. A radius. It wasn't precise enough to knock on doors, but it narrowed the world dramatically. Whoever had made the call to Ruth Cole hadn't been reaching out from another state, or another country. They were close enough to remember the roads by heart. Close enough to know which memories would hurt the most. And close enough to be watching. Law enforcement quietly canvassed properties within the signal range, posing as utility inspectors and surveyors. Most residents cooperated. A few didn't answer the door. One address stood out almost immediately. An old storage facility on the outskirts of Hollow Creek, decommissioned in the early 2000s and later sold through a series of shell companies. It sat less than 7 miles from Ridgeway Spur Road. The building had no current tenants. But it had electricity. Inside, investigators found very little. Too little. The space was clean. Recently so. Dust patterns showed where items had been removed in a hurry. There were drag marks on the concrete floor, scrubbed but not erased. In the back room, hidden behind a false panel, they found something that made everyone stop. A child's drawing. 2 stick figures. One taller than the other. Both holding hands. Above them, written in uneven block letters, was a word that no child that young should have understood so clearly. Safe. There was no date. But the paper was recent. Forensics confirmed the voicemail left on Ruth's phone had been recorded digitally, then deliberately degraded to sound older. The child's voice could not be matched to any existing samples. It might not have been Evan. It might not have been Lila. That uncertainty was the point. Psychological pressure. Misdirection. Control. The same pattern investigators now saw everywhere they looked. Then came the discovery that fractured the case for good. While reviewing archived personnel files, a clerk noticed something that hadn't stood out before, not because it was hidden, but because it had been mislabeled. In 1998, the responding deputy who logged the anonymous tip about children near the foundation had been listed under a temporary assignment code. The name attached to that code had been purged years later during a software migration. But the badge number remained. And that badge number matched someone else. a civilian contractor, assigned to the county at the time to assist with records digitization. His name, Elias Ward. He was never a sworn officer, but he had access to files, to reports, to evidence logs, and to the ability to erase himself. Elias Ward had also been linked, through property records and shell companies, to the storage facility. When investigators went to find him, they were already too late. His apartment was empty, recently vacated. No forwarding address. On the kitchen counter sat a single object. A plastic doll, cracked, missing one arm. DNA testing yielded no usable profile, no fingerprints, nothing solid enough to bring charges. Elias Ward became a person of interest in name only, a ghost with paperwork and a trail that dissolved just as it began to make sense. As for Caleb Moore, the cousin whose death had raised so many questions, new evidence suggested his accident may not have been an accident at all. Bruising patterns inconsistent with the crash. Signs of restraint. If Caleb had known too much or tried to leave, someone had made sure he didn't. The final excavation beneath the coal house turned up one last item. A small, rusted lunchbox. Inside it, wrapped in layers of cloth, was a note written in uneven handwriting, not a child's. It read, "They stayed quiet. You promised." No signature. No explanation. Just proof that more than one adult had known. And said nothing. Ruth Cole never returned to Hollow Creek. Daniel Cole stopped giving interviews altogether. The case remains officially open. No remains have ever been found. No arrests have been made. And yet, every few years, someone leaves flowers at the edge of Ridgeway Spur Road. Always 2 bunches. 1 blue ribbon. 1 yellow. No one has ever seen who leaves them. Today, Evan and Lila Cole are listed as missing. Not deceased. Because there is no proof they didn't survive that first night. No proof they didn't grow up somewhere else, under different names, carrying memories they were told to bury just as deeply as the evidence beneath that house. And somewhere, perhaps closer than anyone wants to admit, someone still knows exactly what happened. They just haven't decided whether the world deserves the truth. 2 children vanished, evidence stayed buried for decades, and the person who may know the truth was never held accountable. So what do you think really happened to Evan and Lila? Was this a planned disappearance, or did someone powerful make sure the truth never surfaced? Let me know your theories in the comments. This community always sees what others miss. If stories like this keep you watching, please like, subscribe, and support the channel so we can continue uncovering cases the world forgot. Your support truly keeps these stories alive.